what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh.
The good news about the best Carolina barbecue spreads by word of mouth. Some of those mouths are louder than others. Other voices reach more ears or eyeballs with carefully crafted words published to the internet. But when it comes down to it, if you want the inside scoop on the best behind-the-scene places for barbecue or really anything else, you got to find somebody who is in the know, someone with the scoop. And if they don't have the scoop on the food, they need to know the right people to find it. Of course, it's also a must that you trust this source of barbecue truth. And for food opinions in the South, a diverse palate, an open mind, and an independent perspective is required. I'm Chigger Willard, and on this 4th of July episode of the Low and Slow Barbecue Show, we've invited a source of food truth in the Carolinas and the South. And of course, Hanna Raskin is absolutely an independent voice in food journalism. Hanna is the creator of the Food Section, a twice-weekly newsletter that provides food eaters with information and analysis about everything they need to know on the food front geographically, from Louisiana and Arkansas east to South Carolina and north into Appalachia. This year, Hanna in the Food Section won the James Beard Foundation Award for Dining and Travel. That's one of 2 awards she was nominated for this year. And this year's medal goes along with another that she received back in 2017. In fact, it was the first ever award presented by the Beard Foundation for local impact journalism. The bottom line, Hanna knows her stuff. And if she speaks, you probably want to listen. So we're going to talk to Hanna about American barbecue traditions on the 4th of July, her favorite plate of food for Independence Day, and the traditional recipe she wants you to bring to the holiday potluck. We'll get her insight on the importance of barbecue in the Carolinas, the best barbecue restaurant around, and of course, she'll get all the questions in the Low and Slow Showdown, including which barbecue is best. Is it the East or is it the West? We'll also talk a little bit about the content that helped her win that award. It's an exit-by-exit guide for food along Interstate 95, and this is an eating guide you don't want to leave home without if you're heading towards Hilton Head or Savannah. Before we talk to Hanna, remember to get the complete lowdown from the Low and Slow Barbecue Show. Visit us online at lowslowbbqshow.com. That's where you'll find the Carolina Pitmaster series of podcasts and the Low and Slow blog with more barbecue stories and recipes, including the recipe Hanna shares with us during this episode. Look for our barbecue pictures on Instagram as well. That's Low and Slow Barbecue Show, all one word. Of course, Instagram is home to lots of great photos and stories captured across the South by today's guest. We're excited to welcome Hanna Raskin to the Low and Slow Barbecue Show. Hanna, thanks for joining the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we're excited to have you here. And first, for folks who might not be familiar with your work, please just give us an introduction to Hanna.
Absolutely. So I am editor and publisher of the Food Section, which is a digital magazine covering food and drink across the American South. I launched my publication in September 2021 after about a decade as food editor of the paper in Charleston, South Carolina. And I am still based here in Charleston.
Okay, so tell me, how did you get first writing about food and culture, before Charleston? And I know you got some roots here in North Carolina, too, in that journey.
I sure do. Yes, I spent about 10 years in Asheville. In fact, that's where I started doing food writing on a professional basis. I worked at the Mountain Express, which was the alt weekly and still is in Asheville. So yeah, that was the first time I got paid to do what I was doing. I got started in food writing. It was an interest of mine going way back. But as you recall, in the days before the internet, it didn't really seem like a career path. So I took kind of an adjacent route to this job in that I worked in restaurants. I waitressed like a whole bunch of people. And I was a reporter right out of college. So which is why I needed waitressing to pay the bills. And then I ended up going back to grad school and studying some food history there. And so we put all that together. And by the time Mountain Express was looking for a food writer, I had the restaurant experience, the writing experience at the newspaper, and some of the academic background as well.
Yeah. So, and then tell me how that evolves into, getting what really must be sort of a premier gig in one of the great food cities in our nation, in Charleston, at the Post and Courier there.
Yeah. Yeah, so after being in Asheville, I moved around a bit. I joined Voice Media Group at the time. I was the critic in Dallas and then up in Seattle. And I was working in Seattle, anxious to get back to the South when I got a call from the editor in Charleston asking if I'd be interested in coming here. So, of course, I was.
Yeah. Okay. So you're deep into a career in food journalism. Where do you find the motivation to keep going down this path? And we'll get into the food section a little bit more, but what keeps you going in food journalism day after day after day?
That's such a funny question because I guess we do some of the only work that we are biologically forced to do. I don't really need to worry about eating. My body's going to tell me to do it one way or the other. So yeah. I think I'd rather eat the good stuff and share the news of it with other people.
Yeah, great. So you talked a little bit about the food section, a nice introduction there. What prompted you to launch into the food section after, what's an established career already in food journalism, kind of going out on your own as a freelancer? And I know there's some other things that you do as well. How'd you get started going down that path?
Yeah, I was fortunate to be offered money from Substack to do it and really kind of hemmed and hawed about whether I wanted to leave the newspaper because, as you say, it was a great job. And I had a great group of readers and certainly a great group of colleagues. So the reason I decided to leave in the end was because during the pandemic, it was clear to me that so many people here were relying on me for their pandemic information. And I don't mean just about restaurants, although that was a big part of it, but it was just sort of eating and drinking was kind of the way they related to what was happening in the community, the way they understood it. And they would come to me, with their concerns and with their hopes, all this. And it occurred to me that with so few food writers out there, so few working critics, that there were people in places who had nobody to call to say that, they just weren't sure what was safe or whatever. And so food writing, I realized was so important that it shouldn't be limited to just one city. And so the chance to bring it to the whole region was pretty exciting.
Yeah. So as you kind of evolved into the food section, it seems like maybe the stories are changing with you a little bit from going from, investigative piece. I guess you're doing a little bit of the same, more reviews, but tell me what sets the food section apart beyond sort of the geography of it from maybe the work that you were doing in Charleston, or is it sort of a continuation of what you've been doing?
It's an exact continuation. So it's really, okay. That kind of held me back for a little while because I kept telling people, I was like, it's just like what I did in Charleston. And it took me about 6 months to realize no one had any idea what I was doing in Charleston unless they lived here. But fortunately, now that it's, almost 2 years into the publication, I can point to it and show folks what I do. As you described, it's sort of a mix of restaurant reviews, investigative pieces, feature stories, Q&A, all the things you'd like to find in a magazine that's entertaining and informative.
Why do you feel like it's important for somebody to be bringing these types of stories to people in local communities around the South, not just in Charleston and not just really just like a food review or a restaurant review? Why is it important to go so much deeper than that on really a local level?
Well, I think, we spend so much time and money on what we eat. I feel like you want to be able to derive as much from it as you possibly can. So if you understand sometimes the stories behind it or, I just think that enhances the experience. Like I said, we are biologically going to eat 3 times a day. So this is just an opportunity to make that a more worthwhile and meaningful experience.
Yeah. So as you've launched this on Substack and started down this avenue, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've run into?
Boy, nobody knows what Substack is. I think that's one of the biggest problems. You say that word outside of media circles and nobody knows what it is. So that's been a challenge. It's been a challenge not knowing where my readers are. They're all over the world, which has been interesting. So getting to know folks outside of my local community. And I think the biggest challenge for me is running a business. That's something, and it's funny. I found now, at cocktail parties, you realize this is something some huge percentage of Americans have done. It is the American way. You start talking about entrepreneurial activities and everyone's got a story, but those of us in journalism have no business background whatsoever. So that's been a really interesting experience.
Yeah, and there's definitely challenges involved with that for
Mhm.
sure. What do you feel like your biggest successes have been in here? And I guess you're getting close to a couple years anniversary here with the food section.
Yeah, so it'll be 2 years in September, and I'm very proud that this year we were nominated for 2 James Beard Awards, which I think it just goes to show that these stories are resonating and reaching people, or so I hope. And it feels good to be up against these huge multinational media corporations, getting out stories that those folks who aren't on the ground were never going to find or tell.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit more about those stories on the ground. Where do you get the ideas? Where does this content originate?
Well, I spend a lot of time on the road. So it's a lot about just looking around and talking to people. And a lot of it happens now online as well, just kind of keeping tabs on, every kind of local Facebook group. And yeah, really talking to people is the very best. People know that you're interested in these stories and they bring them to you. So that's helpful.
Yeah, and so maybe kind of going a little bit back to the transition between, what I assume to be the print news world into more of a digital online format. How do you feel like this digital world that we're in now has helped facilitate what you're trying to do with the food section in food journalism and, throughout the South and reaching some of those broader audiences that you might not just reach with that, that Sunday edition of the Post and Courier or the Mountain Express?
Right. Yeah. One of the first things I did was create a print edition of my website, actually, because I know that there are a lot of folks who aren't online yet. So everything
Yeah.
I publish a print quarterly that people can read, because I am very much a big believer in meeting people where they're at. So,
Hmm.
I certainly have not rejected print. I think there's a lot of value in it. But as you say, yeah, it's according to Substack, I have readers in 88 countries. So that's cool, I guess.
Yeah, they're not going to pick up that newspaper at the corner
Right.
of
Exactly right.
the newsstand there. So let's talk a little bit about the process there. So what is your process of tackling a project like, for instance, the restaurant guide for every stop of I-95 is it from Georgia up into North Carolina and maybe into Virginia as well?
Virginia. Yes,
Yeah.
Virginia is South Carolina, so it stops a
Okay.
little north of Georgia. So there's still portions of it that need to be done. But so that was based on a project I'd done previously at the Post and Courier for I-26, which is, the highway that takes
Hmm.
you from one end of South Carolina to the other. And I thought, let's see if we can't do it on 95. And it's really fun. That is a tremendous amount of online research at the outset. So, I get out the Google map, I look at each exit and can see, what are all the restaurants that fit my parameters, which are independently owned and within, I can't remember if it was 3 miles from the exit. I look at all the restaurants. And the nice thing about working and covering restaurants is you get to be pretty savvy at sizing them up online. And I don't mean what they post or what people say on Yelp, but once you start seeing the photos of the food, you get a sense like, all right, this is a place worth checking out. But then you got to go and eat the food because you're not always right. Places that you think are going to be terrific aren't, and vice versa. Places that you didn't think were going to be all that great, you go and stop. So it took days. It's this huge project. And what's funny is when you're writing about restaurants on an interstate like that, you're barely on the interstate because you're on the back road, like exit to exit. And that was the first time I ended up buying carbon offsets for that project because I traveled so many miles in that car, and
Yeah.
you got to go fast. So you're primarily getting takeout. So you could barely see out the back window because I had so many styrofoam boxes. And I was like, I'm just ruining the earth. I'm just eating meat wherever I go and burning fossil fuels. So it was a fun
Yeah.
project. Mm-hmm.
Well, and you mentioned some of those, the best restaurants that I know, especially the mom and pops, might not have a great digital presence out there. So, how do you find those diamonds in the rough when you're stopping at one of those exits?
Yeah, that's what I mean is that, so there's there's just the approach to online research. So I don't really care what story they're telling about themselves. One, because they can frame it any way they want to, but two, exactly as you say, they don't have the time or budget to maybe, frame themselves the way they want to. So I'm literally looking at Google Maps. Like, I just need to know there is a restaurant there or there isn't, and so from there, that's where I take it from. But yeah, you got to be out in the field and see what's
Sure.
actually there.
Well, and speaking of out in the field, I know some of your more recent content's involving your whistle stop tour. There's been a stop in Salisbury. I know Jessup, Georgia, one of the more recent stops. Is similar line of thinking when you're catching the train or the Amtrak to ride through the South and hit some of these stops.
Yeah, this originated because when I first launched the publication, I did my own kind of whistle stop tour this was when the pandemic had we just had, vaccines become available and people were venturing out again. So this was July 2021, I suppose. And so I hadn't traveled throughout the pandemic and it felt time to reacquaint myself with the region I was covering. And at the time, Amtrak, trying to lure people back, was selling some sort of like $99, like a Eurail, like you could go anywhere, get out.
Yeah.
Right. So I spent close to a month, maybe it was 3 weeks, something like that, just traveling by train throughout the South. And so because of that, I've kept that up doing, going into train towns, not always by train, but going to train towns and doing just what you say, just finding the places that are really can't miss places to eat.
Yeah. What kind of role does outside voices play in suggesting some of your content ideas? I know that you accept some contributors, but how often are you looking for folks to suggest some of those ideas?
Well, I'm always open to pitches from freelancers for sure. But I'm really proud that of the hundreds and hundreds of newsletters I put out, nothing has ever originated from a press release.
Wow. Yeah, and that's impressive. But what about Joe Q Public in Hickory, maybe saying goodbye to their favorite snack bar?
Yeah, for sure. Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm always interested in what my readers and subscribers want to hear more about. Like I said at the outset, I'm really talking to people is the best way to source stories. Yeah.
And so you kind of referenced this when you got into the I-95 and the I-26 tour, a ton of information on your website. You're extremely prolific in what you're producing out. How much of your background working in Charleston and Asheville and maybe even Dallas, how much of that plays into the content that you're creating now? I'm not saying you're reheating old cabbage, but you got to have some of those old seeds for thought from those previous visits to show up again here and grow in the food section.
Well, like I said, the 95 project was based on the I-26 project. So I thought that was just really fun. But I don't think anything else has a predecessor in that way. I try never to write the same story twice. I don't think I've ever covered the same thing. No.
Wow. So there's always something original. The landscape of food is so.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh.
There's always new stories.
There's always new stuff. Yeah. I've never had to rewrite a story.
Well, before we take more of a bite into today's podcast and in our topic, and that's 4th of July and especially barbecue, let's folks know where they can find out more about the food section. Where can they go and get content or maybe get subscribed to you?
Sure. It's thefoodsection.substack.com.
Very simple. And of course, they can subscribe or be free and you get varying levels of content.
Yeah, if they're free, you don't get much. Like I said, I do a lot of work and it's pretty costly. So it is a deviation from a lot of the Substack newsletters in that the people who don't pay don't see a whole lot, unfortunately.
But as a paying subscriber, you get a lot of great stories.
I hope so.
Yeah. So as we kind of cut into the 4th of July food traditions and barbecue in the South, I want to talk about Hanna's 4th of July specialty. What is your specialty if you're going to a picnic or really any kind of potluck? What's Hanna going to take?
It's so funny you ask. It's piggybacking off the no pun intended, the question you just asked. I don't think I've ever made the same dish twice. And maybe that's just because I'm not good at anything. I don't know. But and that's true even in my own home. Now that I'm not a critic here in Charleston, whereas I used to have to eat out every single meal because there were things to keep tabs on. Now, if I'm in Charleston, I try and save a little money and eat at home. I don't think I've ever made anything a second time. I'm always like, what else can I try? What else can I do? So I'm afraid I don't have a standard for you.
A back-to-back go-to.
That's right.
That's hard to believe. Well, as a food journalist, how much time do you really spend doing that home cooking and testing out some of these recipes? The landscape, again, is limitless.
Yeah, right. So very, very little. I don't cover home cooking so much. I don't run recipes of any kind. I don't, I always say when I was working as a critic, as a restaurant reviewer in a local market, I used to keep my oven. I have to actually remind myself, I'm going to get a stove or an oven. That's how much time I spend in the kitchen. But I used it to store my records because it just wasn't going to use that. So
Wow, that's tremendous jeopardy for your records. Nobody came in and turned the oven on to 350 and bake all the wax.
no.
Well, that's fortunate. I guess that was a good
Yeah.
luck stroke there. Now, you kind of keeping in the tradition with the show, you have shared a recipe, and it's for Benny wafers. And
Yes.
why is that? If this is the one thing that you're going to make in the recipe that you've shared with our audience, why is that what you're going to bring to a party or a potluck?
Well, I was super excited about this recipe. It came from the late Emily Meggett's cookbook, and we just lost her recently. And so it was because she had passed, I believe, that week. I was going to a potluck, and I thought, well, this might be nice. Was up in Winston, and I thought, well, it might be nice to bring something from South Carolina. For listeners who might not know, Mrs. Emily Meggett was part of Gullah Geechee cookbook. That was her heritage here in the Low Country. And so Bene wafers, and again, I don't know, I don't want to talk down to your audience in any way, but Bene is like sesame seed, and it is a long time Low Country tradition. So those look like they would be manageable. So I made the Bene wafers out of the cookbook to bring up to Winston with me. And they were such a hit. And they were so easy to make. They looked so pretty on the plate, and people loved them. And what was really neat was, Ms. Emily was like a matriarch of her community. And so there were several older guests at this potluck who were like, this is how my mother made them. Like it really, it goes back. Yeah, these Bene wafers that are a little different than how you get them now. They're crisp and, they have that nutty quality. They're delicious.
Yeah, well, you could probably tell by the way I mispronounced it the first time. I've never heard of it. And I mean, I've been to Charleston so many times. I got friends on Johns Island. It's one of our favorite places to play. And somehow, I don't know whether I'm deprived or maybe I should just be embarrassed. I've never had a Bene wafer.
No, I mean, it's so interesting as Charleston has become more cosmopolitan, which is fantastic that we have, people coming from all over the country, and there's so many different global influences that we didn't have before. But some of those local traditions are, threatened to be lost. It used to be, certainly if you flew in and out of Charleston, you'd certainly get a bag of Bene wafers before going home. But it's not as prominent as it once was. And I should say it tracks back directly to West Africa. Bene is a plant that came with enslaved laborers. So it's really important. It's really important that people eat that in Charleston. It really is part of our story.
Yeah, part of the heritage. And Hannah shared Emily's recipe that we'll include on our Low and Slow blog, so you can go check it out there. Let me talk before we get into that barbecue, and maybe this is part of the reason, but what do you enjoy most in doing food writing, and why is that?
What's so great about food, and I think I alluded to this earlier in talking about the pandemic, is it really opens people up to talk about things that they might not talk about otherwise. I did a series, one of my favorites, and this was a weekly column when I was at the paper here in Charleston, just asking people, what did you eat yesterday, beginning to end? And I would go up to people at the bus stop. In later years, my Uber drivers were wonderful for this. It is a really diverse cast, just anyone I could meet.
Yeah.
And it's just fascinating. The decisions people make are so revealing about their lives and things they might not have told you otherwise, saying like, well, I make that the way, I picked it up in military service. I remember a woman saying like, I developed a craving for that after a certain illness, and it's like all of a sudden you're talking about people's lives. And though they carry those resumes with them in the foods that they love and eat. I find it fascinating.
Yeah, that's interesting. Haven't thought about it that way. It's sort of a resume for your personal life outside your career life, your food resume.
That's right. Yeah.
Good, bad, or otherwise, everybody's got one, whether it's McDonald's and Burger King or Bojangles here in the Carolinas, or something a little more highbrow.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I want to say, that is really a core principle of the work I do is I have no judgment. Like I think people sometimes hear the words food critic. And I think because critic in normal English means negative, people think that there's a judgmental aspect to it. And I have none. So long as people are enjoying what they're eating and not hurting anybody by doing it, I think it's great.
Well, that makes a great segue for us to get into barbecue. And we know a lot of people in America enjoy barbecue. We'll talk about that. But first, what is barbecue to Hanna Raskin?
So I was thinking about this because you teed me up on this question. I'm glad you did because I know this is controversial. And I know we no longer say barbecue is low and slow because some turn up the heat really high. And I know we no longer say it's in direct heat because there are plenty of great pitmasters in Texas who use direct heat. And so I think the defining aspects of barbecue are one, fire, gotta be, live fire. And two, I think hard work. I think when you try and explain to someone from up north, like what's the difference between grilling and barbecue, somebody has put work into it. And so I was first going to say like, well, it's just the time, but I don't know. There are some things that come off a pit kind of quickly. I think it's hard work. That to me is the defining aspect of barbecue.
Yeah, I like that. That's a great definition. So, beyond it being hard work, what do you feel like constitutes good barbecue? The work's got to be there, but what else makes it good?
Gosh, I mean, what else makes it? It's such, as you know, it's such a broad and diverse category. I can't just say, right? It's like if we talked about specific cuts of meat, maybe we could talk about one thing or another. But I don't know that there. I mean, I think. I mean, I guess I would continue on what I was just saying. You should be able to taste evidence of both those things, the fire and the work, right? It should taste like it was cared for. And I like to taste a little smoke in what I would consider barbecue.
Yeah, cool. Definitely. That's part of the low and slow piece of it, and probably sort of the hot and fast as well. But one thing that we do know is that people in America don't agree on an awful lot of things in 2023, but somehow, according to some of your reporting and some folks from the Data Essentials sort of surveys of people around America, we really do like barbecue.
So
right?
much. And so I don't have those figures in front of me, but as you say, it was a really interesting research study they did last year that just showed that Americans are crazy for barbecue. And I mean, I don't need to tell you, North Carolina, people fight about it too, but that goes back around to what I was saying about how food gives us an opportunity to talk about things that we might not otherwise. And it gives us, I think, this chance to learn how to debate with one another in a positive and productive way. If we could take some of our food fighting and apply it to the political, we might be in better shape.
Wow, that's really a great perspective. And some of those numbers, I did take some notes.
Oh,
94%
Incredible.
of people responded that they are pro barbecue. We don't agree on anything else in that kind of way. And it just kind of goes to show you that, we can debate something that we love. And at the end of the day, we still love it and probably love each other and don't have to have a fist fight over Eastern versus Western.
That's right. That's great.
So and let's get on to the Carolinas and barbecue here. It's definitely rich traditions. And some people say that barbecue's born in North Carolina or South Carolina or Virginia. What does barbecue mean to the Carolinas, you think?
Everything. I mean, I think it means everything. Yeah. It's so important. Gosh, I don't know how to classify it, but it's such a point of pride and a patriotism. It is there when people come together. It is such a part of people's life histories and memories. It's huge.
Yeah. So and kind of part of that patriotic part that leads us to the 4th of July and barbecue seems to have such a huge part in Independence Day. How do you feel like barbecue and the 4th of July become so intertwined in what we do around that big week of summer?
Yeah, so it's been going on for hundreds of years, those two things together, because the 4th of July was traditionally, like in the early 1800s, it was a time for politicking. It was a time when the politicians would entertain. And as you know, there's no better way to feed a large crowd than barbecue. It's a whole lot easier than canapes or whatever, So this is something that's been going on, like I said, since the early 1800s.
Yeah. How do you feel like since, dating back to that period, there's a lot of different cultures that have gone into the American barbecue recipe. How do you feel like they've all assimilated into one idea of what the 4th of July barbecue means to people?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if they have. I don't know. I have not, I haven't done the poll. I'd have to ask the good people at That Essential. I don't know. But it does mean it is part of that coming together. And it does recognize, and it does recognize that we are all different. It recognizes democracy first and foremost. We may not want to necessarily still have political debates on July 4th, but this is a holiday of democracy. So yeah.
Yeah, and again, we're a big melting pot. A lot of different cultures and history and heritage has gone to create the different regional barbecues that exist everywhere. And kind of with that democracy stance that you've just taken, does that make barbecue the truly American food cuisine more than any other? Is barbecue our food?
Is like jazz.
Yeah.
Gosh, I mean, I don't want to offend anyone in the Caribbean, but yeah, what it's become, I think, what it has become is very American. Now, I mean, I don't know. Talking about debates, we could debate all day. Like, is barbecue more American than a McDonald's cheeseburger? I don't know. I think are some arguments to be made that efficiency and capitalism, unfortunately, are more defining factors in our country right now than democracy. But I like the idea that barbecue is the ultimate American food.
Well, again, nothing to take away from people in other places. Australia is known for barbecue.
Sure.
I'm sure you've got some of those listeners there. We've got some listeners there in Australia. Their idea of a barbecue may be a little bit different, but again, just like you said, it usually involves fire and hard work. And we're not just talking about flipping a burger on a hot pad.
Right. Absolutely.
So if you're attending a 4th of July celebration and you can make up your perfect plate of barbecue and sides, and I know you've been all around the South and much more of the country, what are you going to put on your 4th of July barbecue plate?
Well, about my favorite food is beans, so I'm going to hope that that's on the side dish table.
Yeah, of course, it's a barbecue. 4th of July.
And then that's right, 4th of July. I mean, I associate it, and I was like, why is that the association? And I remembered, I was always, as a kid, I'd be at summer camp for July 4th, not at home. And so because of that, we didn't have big elaborate barbecue. Also it was a Jewish summer camp, so we definitely didn't have any kind of like pork barbecue.
Right.
But we definitely had watermelon. And that to me is like the quintessential July 4th food. Eating watermelon, and then we'd have the seed spitting contest and the grease watermelon contest. When I think of July 4th, I think of watermelon first and foremost.
There you go. And beans are okay too. That's all right.
And I mean, I'm going to eat whatever barbecue is served, but the things that come to my mind first, I know, are beans and watermelon. I'm simple, keeping it cheap.
So as you do travel around, whether you're on I-95 or the interstates or our rail systems or even the airports, you feel like there's anywhere that people are just going wrong with barbecue? I mean, is there any concepts that just strike you as outside the definition? Charlatan food businesses that maybe are diminishing heritage.
I really thought you were saying Charlotte, and I was like, I'm not going there. I'm not going there.
Not charlatan. Maybe Charlotte charlatans.
Yeah.
Where are people going wrong with what they're calling barbecue, or are we all right in our food?
Oh my goodness. I think I'm just going to revert to the definition I gave, that if the work isn't going into it, I'm going to be a little bit suspect about what they're calling barbecue, right? So, I mean, you certainly do see, and it's funny, I'm working as, I don't think we talked about this, but I'm also a columnist for the Southern Foodways Alliance, and our theme this year is Where is the South? And so that means I've gotten to travel outside the South looking for remnants of the food culture here. And yes, there's plenty of people, plenty of places where what they're calling barbecue is just, a piece of meat with barbecue sauce on it. And that's wrong.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
That's wrong for sure. You mentioned Southern Foodways Alliance, another place you contribute to. Take me a little bit more down that road. Where are you finding Southern food culture elsewhere in these United States?
Well, we've just started. So I have just filed a story not long ago about one of the most Southern restaurants I've come across in Las Vegas, Nevada. And it was founded by a Black family that relocated there for work, I believe in the 40s or 50s. And I got to learn so much about the Black community in Las Vegas. And it's as a Southern restaurant as I've seen. But it was interesting being in Vegas because since Southern food is now such a buzzword, there's also, there's a new Southern food restaurant where I think it's at the MGM casino, and the Jonas Brothers opened it. And it was just
those are the charlatans we were talking about. There's no hard work in that. That's flashing cash, right? At the MGM.
Right. So it was really interesting to see.
That's cool. Well, we'll look forward to finding out more about
Yeah.
that on the Southern Foodways Alliance. And kind of going back to the food section, I've been taking your crash course on Southern food. And in there, you talk a little bit about food fights in the South. And then again, one thing is for sure, we do like to fight in the South. Do you think that these fights extend to what belongs on your 4th of July barbecue plate? Are people going to argue about what constitutes the right barbecue plate?
I mean, I know that people will argue about anything, so I don't want to rule it out. But I cannot imagine being at a party where that was the topic of conversation. I hope that's not a party I go to.
Yeah, I'll right there with you. So
Yeah.
before we talk about your own barbecue family jewels a little bit, let's look into the future if we can. What does the future of barbecue look like, and how do you feel like it's evolving in the South from maybe what it once was?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing, and this isn't going to come as a surprise to any of your listeners, but people mashing up their personal culinary heritage with some of the things that are established in the South. I had an opportunity last year for Southern Foodways to write about a restaurant outside of Dallas that's Ethiopian barbecue. I mean, it's really, and it's like, that's terrific. They're doing Texas barbecue. But then, they serve it over injera. They serve it as though, you're having an Ethiopian meal. It's very cool.
Yeah.
So things like that, I think, are probably where we're headed.
Again, a bit of a melting pot of cultures there. So as we do look into the future, and I'm going to kind of touch on one of your other topics, how does alcohol sales fit into barbecue in the South and in the Carolinas? Because traditionally, that's kind of been a no-no area. Didn't find a lot of beer or liquor at a barbecue joint, but that's changing a little bit, right?
It's changed completely. It's fascinating. And so, what it means potentially is it changes the revenue picture. As we know, it is not cheap to make barbecue. It's not cheap to invest that kind of work. And as we know, the best margins for any restaurant are in booze. So if customers are accepting of it, and increasingly they are, I've written about how Dickey's, the major barbecue chain, has made a big point of having cocktails. Like, it has become, it's really become the industry standard. I think, if it works out, it really could be an advantage for small time pitmasters to kind of make back some of what they're spending.
Yeah, so definitely part of the future for a lot of places, but maybe not everybody, right?
Sure. No, not everybody.
Not everybody wants to stay in business, or maybe stick true to your traditions.
Right.
All right, let's turn it over into the barbecue history and kind of go a little bit more into your barbecue family jewels. And they may not run deep, but still interested to know them for our audience. And what is your favorite flavor? And I say flavor in quotation marks. What's your favorite flavor of barbecue?
It's such a hard question. Probably my go-to is going to be in North Carolina barbecue, if that's what we mean by flavor. Is that what we mean? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
We're not going to argue about it.
Well, yeah.
Do you remember where you had your first barbecue? Or was it at your summer camp?
No. The food wasn't great there. No, the first barbecue I had was, so I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and there was a little place called Mr. Rib.
Mr. Rib. That's a good
Rib.
start.
Yeah. Jesse Campbell is a pitmaster there. And while Ann Arbor, Michigan does not sound like a southern city, it is not by any stretch a southern city. It is, of course, just outside Detroit. So because of the car industry and the, migration to work there, Mr. Campbell was born in Mississippi. And so it was Mississippi style ribs barbecue. It's typical, like what you'd find in Chicago as well. But, Mr. Rib, it was known for, and I am certain because it's the largest alumni network in the country, that you have listeners who went to University of Michigan, and they may remember football games in the 70s and 80s. He sold his soul on the roll. And that may have well been my first exposure to barbecue, was Mr. Campbell's soul on a roll.
Yeah, and that's certainly something to make it stand out, a name like that or a tagline like that. So, apart from that, or maybe it is the one, what do you feel like is the best barbecue experience you have? Understanding that you have new experiences in food world and have had hundreds and probably thousands of them all around this country.
Oh my gosh. I rather than answer that question, I'm just going to say what's the most memorable experience I had in the last week, which was I got to go out to Dr. Howard Conyers was having his Roots of Black Barbecue Festival over in Paxville, South Carolina, and does an all-night cook, got a whole hog.
Yeah.
But so I did not stay all night. I showed up in the morning. But when he actually did 2 pits, and on one of them he did a lamb, this little lamb, and it was delicious.
Yeah.
It was great. Yeah.
So apart from the food there, what about that experience made it so special?
It was just, it was a nice gathering of people. We were just talking about booze and barbecue. They're starting a distillery there, the Dr. Conyers and his father. So there's some, moonshine going around, or as they call it, moonshine. It was a really nice event.
Cool. So do you have a favorite barbecue restaurant in North or South Carolina?
I do. My favorite, and I probably shouldn't choose favorites, but I like this one enough that I want to get this right, is Maury's in Andrews, South Carolina.
Okay.
So the closest city to that is probably Georgetown. If you're on the coast, I mean, it's like if you were going up to Myrtle from Charleston, you take a big left swing. And like all the best barbecue places, it's only open from 5 to 9 on Friday and Saturday. So you got to plan it right. But it is real whole hog barbecue. It's just a cinder block building. It's like, you see the place and it looks like it should be in black and white. It is. I don't know how long it's been there, but I love this place so much that I forgive them for not putting any liver in their hash. It's the only non-liver hash in the whole state that I really, really like. It's just a great little place, and they make their own. This is a little separate from the barbecue, but they make their own pound cake and pineapple cake, which are terrific.
Oh, well, if they got desserts off the hook, then this is going to be a good place. Tell me the name again for all of our audience.
Maury's, and that's Morees, I believe. And I want to double check. I'll make sure I got that right. Yeah, it's Morees. Yep.
In Andrews, South Carolina, not North Carolina. Okay.
You got it.
So beside the food section, where do you turn to when you want to read about barbecue and barbecue stories?
So, I was very lucky that when I was in Dallas, my friend, Daniel Vaughn came with me on all my, I go on review meals and things, and brought along Daniel, and Daniel had a little barbecue blog. And, as you know, he's now the barbecue editor at Texas Monthly. And so I trust Daniel first and foremost.
Excellent. So you kind of touched on another topic also I wanted to go into, and that's, celebrity barbecuedom. All the barbecue pit masters have really reached a celebrity status kind of in the world over these last 5 or 10 years, or is that something that's always been? Have they always been celebrities? And, why do they hold such high esteem in our community, you think?
Well, I think they're controlling the fire. I think you don't want to do them wrong, right?
Yeah.
I think on a local level, like I said, I bet everyone from Ann Arbor knows that name, Mr. Rib. Now in that case, I don't know how many people knew the person behind it. They may have just known him as Mr. Rib, which means they didn't exactly know him at all. But I think there has always been, some sort of romance around these guys.
In the similar vein, you mentioned Daniel Vaughn, and I feel like I'm kind of talking to one too, and Hanna Raskin. How does that food celebritydom extend to the journalists who are bringing these stories to it?
I don't know. I have not experienced any celebritydom. But I know, it's funny. I actually talked to Daniel about this, and I can't remember what story I was working on. I was kind of interviewing him about this very topic, and he was saying it's tricky because it's like any celebrity, you don't always know who your real friends are. Yeah. He really feels like going into places. It's like, oh, that's why you gave me that piece of brisket. You know what I mean? So I think it's hard.
Yeah, you can't go anywhere without getting the money muscle or the best cut. You're not just going to get Joe Q Average's plate of food there, right?
I think that must be right. Yeah.
So again, let's kind of shift it over to the Low and Slow Showdown. And again, we're talking with Hanna Raskin. So excited to have you here on the Low and Slow Barbecue Show. But these are kind of quick hitters that we want to get through and maybe get your opinion on them before we wrap it up here. So first of all, the best North Carolina barbecue style. And I know this is a Southern food fight, but which is it? Eastern or Western? Which is the best?
I'm going to say Eastern.
Oh, yeah, okay. You got to give us a reason why.
I was hoping we could just move on to the next question.
No. This is one we got to explain.
Because my palate is tuned to vinegar. I think that's why I don't need any, it's funny. You were just talking about what happens when a celebrity comes into a restaurant. And again, I'm no kind of celebrity. But sometimes when I'm recognized in a restaurant, I work anonymously, my photo isn't posted anywhere. I don't do any of that. But if I am recognized, for a longest time, they'll be like, oh, we'll send her a chocolate dessert because they think that's what women want. And I don't like anything sweet. I would have been happier had they sent me a cruet of vinegar. Yeah.
So you like the sour sway. Well, let's look at South Carolina. Where do you feel like South Carolina's barbecue style fits in? What's your favorite in South Carolina?
My favorite style. I mean, it's funny. I was just talking to Dr. Conyers about this at his event the other day. I mean, he just takes a little of this and a little of that. And I don't think the boundaries are nearly as defined here as they are in North Carolina. I mean, you can look at those maps online, but you're going to find folks in Greenville doing it the way they do down in Charlotte. It all kind of gets mixed up. But for me, as long as there's mustard in it, I really like it.
And that's going to be the question. That's kind of what I think of outside of the box in South Carolina. That's a little bit different than everybody else, that gold sauce, the mustard flavor. So what is it about that? Or is it just that vinegar flavor you look for?
Yeah, the tang of it is great. And it's pretty, isn't it? I mean, it's a really pretty look. So yeah.
It looks good
exactly.
So again, talking with Hanna Raskin, somebody who's been in South Carolina, you've reported in Dallas, Texas, and in Washington State, which maybe not barbecue, but they certainly know some Pacific influence and maybe the Korean Pacific Islander version of barbecue. What is the best state in these United States for barbecue?
Of all the states? I'm not just saying this. I do think it's North Carolina. I think it has to be, right?
Okay, you have to explain again. Why is that?
Because, I'm torn now. Now I sort of want to say Texas. Gosh, Texas is so big. It's almost hard to classify it as a state. But let's go back to North Carolina. What I like about North Carolina is I feel like generally just the base level of barbecue is pretty high. So that's important. And I think they've made room for novelty. I was in Asheville when 12 Bones opened and it was welcome with open arms. I mean, part of that is because obviously Asheville's outside the traditional barbecue districts, but I think there's a lot of fun stuff happening. So yeah, I'm going to go there.
But great. A lot of fun stuff happening. So if you're going to choose your protein or your main course, is it going to be pork, beef, chicken, or vegetable or soy? I mean,
No. It's nothing weird like that. Gosh, let's see. Oh my gosh. If I really had to choose, I really love beef. I really love beef, which is why I equivocated about whether I ought to say Texas. I do love beef.
Yeah. Do you have a preference there? Brisket or the ribs, the burnt ends?
I like brisket. I mean, we're very lucky in Charleston here that, John Lewis set up shop and it's damn good.
Yeah. And they're starting to see some good brisket around North Carolina too. A lot of that Texas flavor. And there's a lot of these North Carolina pitmasters that are priding themselves as Texas barbecue. Why do you feel like that is?
Because people want it.
Yeah.
It's good. And it's good. It's like, why not try it? I think it's, if you can do pork, try beef, see what happens.
Yeah. Well, and maybe if you're in a state like North Carolina where everybody's Eastern or Western, that Texas flavor is a little bit different than what you might find somewhere.
Yep.
So hash and rice or no?
Yes. That's my favorite. Oh, I love it. Yep.
Excellent. So if you're having barbecue, do you want it sauce with or without?
I like sauce. I really think, I think it's interesting, especially the folks who are really putting a lot of thought into it. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of creativity that goes into the sauce. And if they've come up with something that complements the meat, I'm not going to just abstain from sauce on principle.
And if you have sauce, do you want it sweet or spicy? And, again, also assuming you like the gold stuff, but do you want it sweet or spicy?
Spicy.
And last and most importantly, Hanna, is barbecue a verb or a noun?
Noun.
A noun. And that, my friends, is the lowdown from food journalist Hanna Raskin, founder of the food section, involved in so many other things in the food journalism world. Hanna, thanks so much for joining the Low and Slow Barbecue Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to the Low and Slow Barbecue Show on the Mesh.tv network of podcasts. Be sure to join us online at lowslowbbqshow.com. You'll find recipes from today's podcast, and I'll have links to Hanna and the food section. Visit lowslowbbqshow.com for other podcasts, including our interviews with the Carolina's best pitmasters. Plus, if you subscribe to the Low and Slow Barbecue Show podcast, we'll deliver every episode directly to you. Special thanks to my guest, Hanna Raskin. Thanks as well to our producer, Andrew Moose, and the whole team at the Mesh.tv network of podcasts. Most especially, thank you for listening to the Low and Slow Barbecue Show. I'm Chigger Willard, encouraging you to celebrate independence and food journalism and freedom in the United States. But remember, for the best barbecue and the best barbecue podcast, make it low and slow.
You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.